Hey everybody, and happy holidays from your boy DS at the Movie Blues. Today I'm going to do that thing that I kind of hate when other YouTubers do, where they're like, I'm sorry, I sound sick, I just had COVID, so sorry if my voice is a little weird. Yeah, that's me. I'm sorry, I'm sick, I had COVID, sorry if my voice is a little weird. Let's get it going. At first glance from the trailer, I was kind of surprised to find that, like his previous masterpiece, Rogue One, Gareth Edwards, the creator, seemed to once again revolve around a guerrilla war against a totalitarian nemesis, shot again from a ground-level point of view. But what one may mistake for repetition is actually evolution, because the creator is the natural endpoint of director Gareth Edwards' entire career leading up to this, and is a glorious synthesis of all the director's strengths leading back to his first independent film. That movie, 2010's Monsters, is a gobsmacking exercise in big-budget sci-fi spectacle, pulled off for less than $1 million and utilizing homespun VFX and gorgeous on-location photography to subvert the Hollywood blockbuster machine that's left the industry with wildly bloated budgets and diminishing returns. It was clear from his first picture that Edwards used his keen eye for photography, his documentarian mindset, and his uncanny ability to implement homemade VFX into beautifully photographed frames and landscapes. I mean, he made Monsters for $500,000, which is 0.23% of the budget of the Marvels, and arguably looks better than that movie even though it's from 2010. What Edwards did with Monsters is so critical to the discussion here because the creator is this brilliant, economic, gorgeous beast of a film that implemented the same strategy for Monsters on a far more gargantuan canvas. Watching the fantastic 1-hour making-of doc of the creator only reinforces what's so brilliant about Edwards, as he explains the process of making The Creator, which subverted the entire Hollywood blockbuster system, along with the trappings of the VFX system as well. Edwards demanded that the film be shot entirely on location with almost zero green screens, fully CGI characters, or motion capture suits. Instead, Edwards instructed ILM to basically reverse engineer their entire process for the first time ever. Typically in Hollywood CGI tentpoles like this, whole entire cities, whole entire environments, and entirely CGI characters are made as early as in pre-production, with thousands of digital animators laboring over VFX before the film is even made. Matching his strategy from Monsters, Edwards shot his entire film without the constraints of VFX, and only in post-production was all of the character work, background work, and CGI achieved. In animation terms, this is basically the difference between rotoscoping and traditional animation, where you're taking pre-existing elements and basically painting over them instead of starting them from scratch, which at the time proved to be also much more economic and kind of wonky looking. While to some this may seem like an issue of semantics, it is a fundamentally game-changing way to approach effects work, especially in this day and age. The VFX in The Creator have this absolutely awe-inspiring, naturalistic, lived-in feeling that feels closer to Neil Blomkamp's District 9 than any film since that movie exploded onto the sci-fi scene a year before Monsters. In the making-of doc, Edwards describes the agonizing process of tinkering with the most minimal amount of CGI possible to trick the human brain into thinking what it's perceiving is actually real.
To know, when you look at that person, that they're not human, but you do too much to them, and you don't feel anything.
Call the police.
The difference between some light CGI work on a character's head, for example, versus the total CGI environmental fabrication of a movie like iRobot or even the Star Wars prequels is truly night and day. It is this scaling back of CGI as a total tool of control that makes The Creator so visually sumptuous, so positively lived in and tactile. And much like Monsters, the $80 million budget of The Creator is less than half of what's spent on a typical Marvel movie.
Can you see me?
Astrid, are you okay?
I no longer go by the name Astrid. I'm now known as
Anne Hathaway, Frank and Beverly. Anne Frank, that's a hiding bitch, ain't it?
And while that's led some of the armchair conspiracy theorists of the internet to further blast Marvel for, embezzling its budget money and still looking like shit, a movie like The Creator proves that using our real world, aided by minimal CGI, is such a more powerful visual template than creating an entire planet digitally from scratch, under a time crunch with constant revisions being made. The Creator shows that much like Ridley Scott or Christopher Nolan, Gareth Edwards has a love for cinematic cinema history, an eye for pristine photography, and an otherworldly approach to his work that makes his films almost seem cosmically born from the ether, instead of made in a controlled environment under the watchful eye of Mickey Mouse. And I mean, even when he was under the thumb of Disney, Edwards still managed to make the best goddamn Star Wars movie since Return of the Jedi. Edwards is a colossal talent, a singular vision, and a visual effects genius, but still, the creator seems to have had somewhat of a rocky reception.
Cut the cameras. Deadass.
Claims of tired sci-fi tropes, muddled messaging, and somewhat muted performances seem to have stopped the creator from being the cultural moment like T2 or Blade Runner, two films that feel like obvious inspirations towards the creator. It's sad to think that Edwards may not be able to get carte blanche on a project this size ever again, so I'm truly hoping the studio believes in him as a talent as much as I do. For my money, Edwards has not missed yet, with Rogue One and Godzilla 2014 being some of the most creative and memorable and emotionally resonant blockbusters from the past decade. While the creator isn't perfect, I mean, none of the films I'm talking about here are, perfect, it's still an example of a director putting his entire soul in the zenith of his creativity into a film. You can really feel that in this making of doc as you hear Edwards describing a several-year process of filming all around the world, mostly by himself with only a few other people, operating the camera for the film nearly fully himself.
It's so hard for that person to be perfectly in sync with the director's brain. And so it was always the intention, like, I'm going to operate because it's just easier that way.
Gareth sees the world through a viewfinder, through that lens. It was like, why wouldn't he operate the whole film if that was going to give him the best result?
And overseeing every single visual effect and crafting every single story beat, sometimes that day on location in a guerrilla, ground-level way that is reflected by the gritty guerrilla fighters of his last two films.
He's following our performances as opposed to making us serve a shot like a bag of meat. It feels like he's shooting a documentary and we're living this life.
Much like the protagonists of his recent features, Edwards is a small faction fighting against an unstoppable machine. But he is proof positive that there still can be a voice, a vision, a brilliant mind behind even our biggest, supposedly dumbest blockbusters. Sure, there were elements in the creator that felt a bit worn. I mean, how else are you going to make a movie about a war against AI without invoking The Matrix or The Terminator? Without spoiling the plot here, at least Edwards takes a different, albeit slightly ill-timed position in the creator where he is humanizing the AI side of the war in a way that The Matrix, The Terminator, or mostly every other yarn about AI's takeover simply has never attempted. This might read as false or confusing for people who have watched AI take over the art world, the internet, and the job sector over the past 2 years, but it is a unique and interesting position that felt new and fresh to the genre. Dramatically, I think that this is one of the most successful scripts that Edwards has turned in thus far for one of his features. You know that feeling you got when you were watching Inception and like you're doing all this mental math about dreams within constructs within set pieces, but you still managed to care about Leo's lost family and ultimately the fate of his reality? And like you sat there like, maybe Christopher Nolan actually does understand humanity and isn't a completely lifeless robot. Well, that's kind of the feeling I got from the creator with Edwards and his lead character, Joshua. Sadly, when it comes to character work, it seems that Edwards is closer on the barometer to Ridley Scott or Nolan than he is to Spielberg or Cameron. But with the creator, he's definitely showing some positive evolution. John David Washington starts the film out as the same kind of bland, overly intense action man that he played in Tenet, but as the film begins to peel back the layers on his motivations and past, Washington ends up with a tremendous amount to chew on and delivers a mostly stellar performance that gets better as the stakes of the film intensify. Besides the VFX and the dramatic potency of the creator, it's also a film that breathlessly envelops the viewer with its emotionally ringing but futuristically bleak score by the always sensational Hans Zimmer, which paints a rich, mysterious audio landscape over the film's immaculate visuals. And those visuals go far beyond just adding wheels to people's heads and making cool ships go brrrr. There is also a positively engrossing level of detail throughout the film. A clear and distinct visual language of the world that the creator takes place in is utilized in the same effortless, tactile, and flowing way that the VFX themselves were created. It would easily take a second viewing to drink in the sheer amount of detail, cues, clues, and world building on display in this film. And while it may resemble Rogue One from a simple trailer perspective, there is a level of detail and care put into this brand new sci-fi world that bleeds its way through every frame. Like, it's simply astonishing to me that people want to go out of their way to rail on this movie for having obvious inspirations when it's doing so much mythologizing and so much innovating in every blessed scene without a source novel, without a comic book, without a franchise behind it. As it is, The Creator is a monumental step forward in how we can approach special effects and blockbuster filmmaking. But it's also an ode and a compatriot to films like District 9, Blade Runner, The Terminator, in that it created its own world under the weight of one man's creativity. And that visual acuity and creative brilliance seems to trickle down into every performance, every beat, and every visual in the film. I mean, come on, even Allison Janney is positively badass in this movie, playing like the Hugh Jackman role from Chappie, but with some actual menace behind it. Just compare this movie, the look, the feel, the texture, the emotion, to any movie that Zack Snyder has ever made or is releasing right now, and you'll see the difference between a truly talented visual director versus a director who uses CGI visuals to bombard, overwhelm, and browbeat the viewer into exhaustion. Sure, it may not reach the heights of Terminator 2, I mean, honestly, what does? But The Creator feels like the best segments from the Animatrix taken to celluloid, sent down the Da Nang River and invoking everything from the Vietnam War to Cyberpunk 77 to Fallout to, well, the list might be somewhat endless. Instead of feeling like he's drawing from these things without care, Edwards seems to be molding his own world of sci-fi films and properties with utmost respect, admiration, and understanding of the films that have come before and have blazed a trail to where we are now. The Creator is a film that feels present, not only in its ideas, but in its presentation and emotionality. It may not bring up a bevy of new questions, it may skate a little too close to the whole Jake Sully, going native, Fern Gully horseshit that seems to envelop our biggest stories, but there is enough originality, raw emotion, and goddamn stellar filmmaking prowess on display here to ensure that not only is Edwards one of our greatest new directors, but that The Creator is the fine-tuned masterpiece that he's been building up to his entire career. Absolutely elated to see what Edwards comes up with next. Maybe not 7 years later this time, but can't rush genius. Happy holidays from the Movie Blues. This is a very sick and sweaty DS Lyons. See you later.